All right, it is lights out on December 6th for the RLR Podcast. We again have a fantastic lineup of topics today. I'm Nick. That's Matt. And away we go.
What's up, everybody? Let's start with the weekly recharge. A lot of it's, I guess, kind of Grosjean specific, but a lot of stuff that kind of happened with Grosjean, as quote unquote, based on what happened last week, right, over the last weekend. So, first off, I think Nick, we need to offer a sincere congratulations to Mick Schumacher for his F2 2020 championship today.
Absolutely.
Well done, well deserved. And I believe he will be sitting in a Haas come next year. So we'll see that last name at long last. We'll see the Schumacher
Well,
name back in F1, which I think would be really cool. So
yeah, we'll actually see. We'll see two very famous last names in
with
racing
the
history.
Schumacher last name coming in, I mean, you talk about getting German fans back into the sport, quote unquote, potentially as well. So I think that it'd be interesting to see what next year's going to shape up for a lot of reasons. But it's good to see a Schumacher back in my opinion.
I wholeheartedly agree. Um, so congratulations to Mick. I'm sure his seat will be well received next year and taking the place of. I guess you can't really say he's taking the place of one specific racer since obviously
Yeah.
Roman's out at, with the accident last week, and then obviously that's coming to the end of his F1 season, but also with Kevin Magnussen signing on for the was it the endurance or no IMSA? He
Yep.
signed on for IMSA, so definitely that's going to be interesting to see. But speaking of Roman, his recovery is doing fantastic. For those of you who listened last week or who
He
follow
showed up
F1 racing,
today, or I guess over this weekend at the back up at Bahrain, and he met with the team. Had some nice words. They hung out in the hospitality area for Haas, and it was good to see him. His wife, I believe, accompanied him as well. So it's good to see him, out of the hospital, back on his feet, looking about it. I think as well as would be
well,
expected, right?
yeah,
And not to mention the interview as well. I don't know if you guys caught it, but on
yeah,
the morning show today, there was about I think 8 minutes of the interview with Roman, and, talking about the crash and what went through his head, which was I thought it was fantastic. And I think the full interview is available 40 minutes about I think on F1.com or F1 TV. So if
yeah.
you guys haven't checked out at least even 8 minutes, it's well worth a watch to kind of hear it from his point of view. It's good to see him, his recovery going well and him out and about. But maybe a downside to seeing him is that he will not be racing in Abu Dhabi next weekend, unfortunately. But
Right,
which
which is
of course
it.
brings his F1 career to a close, which is unfortunate.
And I mean, he said in a couple of interviews that he wishes that a crash wouldn't be the way that he left F1,
Mm-hmm.
which was nice to hear that Toto and the Mercedes team reached out and said if nobody will give him one last go out on the track, and he doesn't have a drive for next year, obviously then Mercedes offered him one go around
And their machine,
in their machine. Yeah, exactly.
which, as we
It's
saw today, obviously is a fantastic piece of not even piece of equipment, but just a fantastic machine. And I think it's cool. I know, and Toto, he's I believe Austrian, right? And so a little, Germans and how they do business, kind of can seem a little bit weird at times. But I believe Toto when he said I was watching the interview with him today that that's not to ride on the the high or take advantage of the the post crash
yeah, they're not trying to
environment.
gain any extra
I do believe that
publicity
that
off
is
of this.
sincere. That
Yeah,
Mercedes and Toto, like they're all those kinds of people that don't want to see this amazing, frankly, hero, end on a bad note. He deserves to go out well, and I applaud them for that offer. Should nobody else allow or offer Grosjean the chance to end his career on a much higher note than last weekend. So
exactly. And I
good to
think
see, right?
I think a lot of what people are saying as well about you know people saying while yes it is a miracle in a sense that he got out,
Oh,
not in a
absolutely.
sense. It really is. It also should be noted that it is also beyond a miracle. It's shows the technical prowess of where F1 has come. And if anybody had ever had any question about the safety of F1, last week was
It
enormous
was
improving.
rather unfortunately on display in all the best ways. So, right? I
Exactly.
mean, one thing I always wondered too was I always am a fan of the Halo and whatever, but it was an interesting part of the pre-show kind of this morning for a race day, and that I don't remember who made the comment, but things like like in their gloves or their boots or their racing suits, a 2 to 3 second improvement, for fire prevent or to withstand fire for another 2 to 3 seconds doesn't sound like a lot, and frankly until maybe I would agree, to me at least, until last weekend, doesn't really sound like a whole lot, but it is a whole lot when push comes to shove and it's needed. So
I
you know,
agree.
the continual advancements on safety with, the cars, what training and materials, the medical staff and, top notch medical personnel, not just, in the safety cars and medical cars, but, you know, where was Grosjean, whisked off to after being safely, thank God, brought out of the car, but the on-site, I think they have like an on-site trauma unit or something, with so before being whisked off to the hospital by helicopter. So, I mean, they've got it pretty safely racked up there, which is again unfortunate that it was on display, but it's sometimes nice to know that it's there when you might otherwise forget some, with how successful the races have been for the entire year and many years.
Right.
Oh,
Um,
with that, something a little less, a little more fun, maybe
yeah,
off that.
I would say a lot more fun. Fantech's new wheel.
So cool.
um, for sim racing and real life racing, uh, using the same technology for their racing sim setup that you could just pop out and put into your real life race car and go out and race with is something.
I believe it's a partnership with was it BMW with BMW Motorsport, or what's the actual collaboration? What do you know what team that's
Oh,
with?
I'm not
I'm gonna find it
100%
right
sure.
now.
Yeah, that's probably something we should have written down before we started recording. But I knew immediately which one you were talking about because I had read it earlier this week.
Here we
So
go. Fanatec's new BMW wheel is a sim racing wheel you can put in your race car,
there,
which
yep,
is
that's it.
nuts.
That's exactly it.
So it is a quote rather unusual blurring of the line between real and racing, but it's a result of the collaboration between Fanatec and BMW. Quote podium steering wheel BMW M4 GT3, and I am a firm believer that it is absolutely cool. I want one, but I have absolutely no use for one to
As,
do double duty. And I
uh,
think 99% of people who probably will end up buying it also will probably, not have a use to, unplug from their sim setup and then hop in their race car. But for those who do, I think it's pretty cool.
by the way, just as a side note, I know this isn't on our list, Matt, but did you see that Fernando Alonso is the new face of the Logitech racing wheels?
I did not.
Yeah,
Cool.
um, with the new series coming out, I can't remember what they're calling it. If it's the G29 or G30,
I'm not
but
I gotta get back on the I gotta get back caught up on anything sim racing since we had that sim
yeah,
before I think right before we started recording the podcast, sim racing had grown exponentially. Still is pretty big, but now because there's actual race events going on, I've kind of dropped off from that scene a little bit. So maybe when race season's over here next week, we can drop back into that too, and I will know what all the ins and outs stuff like that.
yeah. So just as a side note, interesting. Um, and it seems like that was well before his decision to move back into F1 that he
Hmm.
signed that contract. But
Okay.
that'll close out Recharge this week. And if it does feel like we're moving the podcast along a little bit faster, we have a huge pump the brakes section today, so we
Yeah,
are
so
trying
a lot
to get
happened.
through.
Let's box and hop into paddock chat here.
Absolutely. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the report out about the economy in electric vehicles.
Okay.
So kind of slowing down a little bit here. Um, we've talked about electric vehicles quite a bit on the podcast and where we think they're going, the engineering behind them, the technical prowess. But
A little bit of personal opinions, I think, as well here and there.
absolutely. But the main thing being, um, at least with this week, uh, how are EVs and the economy moving about amongst gas and oil powered vehicles? And I say oil powered not in the sense of crude oil being dumped into a tank, but oil goes into producing majority of the fuels out there.
Well, the oil
So
market, I think, what, three-quarters of the demand for oil, crude oil, or just quote unquote oil, is transportation. And a large part of that is wheels on the ground, everyday internal combustion engines, here and there, traveling to work, grocery store, your normal stuff. Not necessarily F1 or, things like that.
right,
So it's
yeah,
interesting. I found the article too, and I was reading it, and we were talking about this before, but it's weird that the world and the world economy is recovering, still, and probably will be for quite some time through the after the pandemic, as it's changed the way we all probably live here and will continue to live. But it's also shaping, it's changing human behavior. I think it's also changing world travel. You see a lot of people finding ways to still more or less conduct business, through less travel, whether that be national or international travel.
well, and essentially
And
electronically as well, based on
yeah, and that obviously decreases the demand for, well, quote unquote travel, which therefore decreases the demand of oil. And I think I'm reading British Petroleum said in a statement that we could very well have reached peak oil, before the pandemic, and oil requirement levels might not ever go back to once what they once were. And a big part of that is people finding ways to not need, a use for oil derived transport. But in a similar way, I think much like a lot of people, you all just like internal combustion engines, you expected to see a rapid decline, and we have, frankly, in new purchases and things, and because of travel. But EVs don't share that. I mean, Tesla has sold a record number of cars, I believe, straight quarters of reporting profits. I mean, we haven't seen EVs take the kind of hit, at all that we'll call them ICEs for short, that ICEs have. And, that's kind of interesting to me,
yeah.
especially as the economy recovers. It will recover, but I agree that it won't recover in the same way. And I don't think there will be such a demand for oil even when this is quote unquote all over, you know?
Well,
It's
right in the oil industry already. I mean, we were looking at it, and we can take it from a racing perspective, looking at Moto E and Formula E, and taking a lot of these electric vehicles into consideration is kind of the basing point for a lot of these manufacturers and technology. Taking all of that into effect, and obviously Tesla sales, whether or not they've got quality issues is another story. But you've
yeah,
got
that's besides the point of this right now.
you've got Porsche with
Which
the
I'm sure they'll
Taycan.
still think.
You've got Audi saying that they're taking their fleet electric.
Yep.
You've got
I mean, you're seeing a shift, right? And I think, like I said, I welcome the shift. I like much like you said, Nick. I don't think ICEs will ever truly go away because sometimes, nothing makes me happier than a good old fashioned, V8. you know,
or
good old fashioned, no
right.
one where you can literally, if you need to work on it, like old fashioned cars from the like what 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. You can stand in the engine bay to actually work on the engine.
Yeah, well,
Good old fashioned, just wires and a big, steel block.
exactly.
I think there's always going to be a need for that, but there will come a time, like I've said before, that I'll buy an EV gladly when they reach a certain point. And along those same lines, I think one of the few things that ICEs have over EVs at this point is their economy of scale. They're cheaper to produce, and that is, over years of production, obviously. Battery Batteries and
Right.
technology being the primary driver of EVs and things and software will continue to get better and continue to get cheaper as they reach more a better and better economy of scale. And at which point, sooner I think rather than later, will we start to see EVs beat out ICEs because they're cheaper. Frankly, it's interesting, and they're better, quote
Well,
unquote, better for the environment and some ways more than others.
And once they
And,
can get the sale price down to the,
yeah,
when we're talking the Nissan Versa level, which at
yeah,
least
the engines become cheap, quote unquote. The engines become
yeah,
cheaper. So do the cars, and they're still, they're greener, I would say, but there's still people need to realize that you're sourcing that power from potentially non-green methods. So they're not, when you buy an EV, it's not, you're automatically helping the environment more than you were before. But that too, I think, will get better and better over time because countries will have to realize there's an increased demand for electricity. They'll have to compensate by increasing their output, and then they'll turn their eyes to making sure that I think is green or continually, evolving to be more and more environmentally friendly as well. So it's interesting
yeah.
as the economy recovers. We'll see what happens, but I could be this could be the horizon with maybe a shift from oil to finally the shift from oil to EV. Who knows?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to think about, and just growing up with
Yep.
mostly ICEs. It's a shift for us in our generation,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll be interesting to see as newer generations come in, and technology moves along. See where that goes.
And speaking of newer generations coming in,
Yeah. So
we had
the
an interesting announcement. If those who haven't heard, fellow fellow aviation nuts might obviously already might already know, but we had some recent-ish news about a controversial thing in the airline industry.
yeah. So Boeing, one of the largest manufacturers of commercial airliners in the world, has been given permission by the FAA, the American Federal Aviation Administration, to unground the 737 Maxes. Now,
We
uh,
should be clear that that's not just service as normal. That's after I believe a lot of software, at least a lot of software changes. And I don't think we've ever gone really, really, really deep into what happened. Or maybe we did on last podcast with MCAS and a single point of failure and stuff like that. But
I don't believe we
essentially,
did, but
I don't think if you want to, if for those listening, if you want to hear us go into the actual what caused the crashes a couple years ago or a year ago, we can. Because obviously we know what led all of that. But for in layman's terms, software updates and essentially fixing the issues that went wrong, along with new pilot retraining, essentially. So
yeah,
it has
and
been
it does
cleared to
seem.
fly again with these changes, but I'm not saying I won't fly on one. I'm not saying I don't trust that it's changed. I don't think we'll actually see commercial flights. I think until end of December there was one quote unquote commercial flight that was a full of I think like 70 or so people from media and it was successful. But it's interesting to see how the industry and particularly consumers who fly if they will choose to fly on that airframe. I mean, you know, I frankly don't even have an opinion on if it will have a successful comeback or not. But nonetheless, it's been cleared by the FAA to fly. So again,
So some of the reports that I was reading were that usually after, especially after something like this, where it's the only media coverage that really has been out there have been the incidents with the 737 Max.
mm-hmm.
There were a lot more incidences, or a lot more flights that did not have incidences, than the two that happened. Obviously, the two that happened were catastrophic, and I'm not trying to downplay that. Obviously, and there was a reason that Boeing grounded the plane. At this point, it, and we've discussed it, the failure points and things, and that's something we can dive into later. But with those being worked out, some pilot retraining, some updates to software, I as an aviation nut and understanding how large aircraft work, even I'm a little hesitant about the 737 Maxes, at least until we start seeing some more
Mm-hmm.
commercial use out of them, and true finished cold
I'd
and
have to
dark to
agree with
cold
you.
and dark flights. And as someone, like I said, who understands how this stuff works, um, it just to me seems, I can't imagine someone who doesn't understand how this works, because I mean, fear is based off of the lack of
Well,
understanding.
what they say is ignorance is bliss.
Well,
A lot of
ignorance is
people
bliss, and
distrust in
fear.
media, and frankly, if there's good media coverage and good fair media coverage on this, then maybe we will see consumer trust largely come back. But I'm in agreement with you. I'm not saying outright that I don't trust it fully, but I will agree, and I will agree in saying that I don't I don't, how do I say, I don't fully trust it. And that's not to say that I wouldn't ever fly on one. I don't think I'd fly personally on one soon for the same reasons, knowing, you know, being in the camp of not knowing how it works and also knowing how it all works. I'm not really fully comfortable to, say at the end of December here, step onto the airframe and take a flight. you know,
Yeah,
um,
I think there's still quite a significant amount of thing, and I'm a generally pretty hesitant person. I think you and I both are aware of that.
I think you'd argue that I'm generally, pretty optimistic and stuff like this. I would usually
Yeah,
just say, "Oh, I'm sure they fixed it," and I would kind of go on faith. But not, I don't think for me, not this time.
yeah, I'm the kind of person who, if you're going to get me to ride a roller coaster, I have to watch it go around the track and understand the physics behind it before I get on it, because I don't necessarily trust
We
it.
should go to a. We've never been to a roller coaster. Cause I'm definitely not. Even as a kid, I was the one that wanted to get in front regardless first time and see what happened. So maybe I'll hold that back this one time, not to see a way to see what happens.
Yeah, well, and for
And
me,
that
even
also
so,
sounds bad too because I don't God forbid I don't want anything to happen. I want it to be 100% successful. Period. No one should be a guinea pig for it.
well, and
But that
that's what I'm
said,
trying to avoid here. Is I don't necessarily want to be Southwest guinea pig flight.
yep.
And or anybody else who's operating it. Just obviously Southwest is the largest operator. The Max is right now, or at least the largest owner operator in the states. It's it'll be interesting. I certainly want to see more out of it before I decide to book a flight that
Hmm.
says 737 Max on it. For those of you who don't know, small travel tip: you can see what kind of plane you're flying on beforehand if you book through most travel sites.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
Obviously not sponsored, but Google Flights will tell you what kind of plane you're on. Travelocity, I believe, does. Expedia does. Most
Yep.
places, or if you book through the airline's website, it'll tell you what plane you're on. So if you
I
do
mean,
have
sometimes
fears
even if you
about it,
buy a ticket at the airport, it'll say sometimes, at least it used to a couple years ago, even say it on the ticket, what kind of airframe you're flying on. So
most of the time it does. Now, that being said, if you're already at the airport and you're buying the ticket, you're going to be
kind of stuck.
yeah, you're going to be stuck at that point. You don't really have a choice to say like, "Oh, I need to go from Chicago to Denver, but I want to fly on an ERJ." That's not going to happen if you're buying it
Yeah.
at the airport. Now, you can.
I think another important thing too, maybe to round this out is, this is also not saying that I trust quote unquote my pilots. I trust my flight crew, because they're the ones. This is their office. They are charged with keeping all the souls on board
And
safe,
if you've ever
and
seen the
they themselves
logbook
have
of a pilot, I mean,
what's that?
I have pilot friends. If you've ever seen the logbook of a pilot, the amount of hours that they log on an airframe before they're certified is
Mhm.
incredible.
They are still. It's not to say that the flight crews or even potentially the airframe is untrustworthy. I mean, it might be a little, I don't want to sound crass, but like out of all the flights even after the FAA arguably shouldn't have continually allowed the 737 Max to fly, only two crashes happen. Now that's unacceptable. I fully admit that's unacceptable. At the same time, those crews at the control of the even those two unfortunate flights did everything they could, I'm sure, to keep passengers calm as much as they could, to take control of the aircraft and try to keep people as safe as they could. So people who operate these, airframes, big or small, in the industry, I trust them. And it's, if I were, it could be as simple as I see what happens, I play it, we let it play out and see what kind of reports come out. Maybe I step onto it personally for the first time, a little hesitant, and I'm sure that that flight crew could put me at ease real quick. If they've been flying on it for months and months and months or years at that point, I would trust them wholeheartedly.
Absolutely. And honestly, with what I've been reading about the 737, I'm a little more, uh, I guess, understanding now, knowing that the 737 Max does have there's settings in place where the pilot will be able to, um, obviously take over the
Stop what was the problem before,
right,
basically.
yeah, stop the problem
Yeah.
before. But even more so, it makes me interested to know, um, these Boeing is kind of known for being the pilot's plane versus their biggest and largest competitor, Airbus, being more of the how do I put this? It's not
Well,
necessarily the
maybe what you're saying
pilot's
is
plane, but
Boeing is used to individuals in the industry are used to getting all the information from Boeing about everything and at any question they ask. And maybe Airbus doesn't always give as much information as Boeing traditionally does.
I would actually say that Airbus gives more information, but the ability to take over something, being that the Airbus is a fly-by-wire system,
Hmm.
where the Boeing, and we can dive deeper into this into another podcast, but with Boeing being more of a hydraulic-based system, where if an electronic fails, you can still have control of something. That's the only thing that scares me about flying on an Airbus is if a sensor goes bad, it's an electrical sensor and it's an electrical system. Uh, there's not a physical connection, a hydraulic connection between
Yeah.
most of the equipment in an Airbus,
Yep.
and
Not to say that
that's
Airbuses aren't safe.
no, because obviously
Definitely not.
obviously the A320 Neos and the A321 Neos, their current platform, have not been grounded for 8 months. So
That's true. So we'll have to see how it pans out. I mean,
yes,
it's kind of unprecedented and much like industry with EVs and one this week and COVID. I mean, everything in this year period and maybe even years prior. We'll just have to see how it pans out.
yeah, quite honestly, and again, we can talk about this later, but I think COVID might have saved Boeing here a lot of money because
Yeah.
if this Max was grounded during a heavy travel year,
Oh boy.
that would have been terrible. Now, speaking of COVID travel,
Yeah. I mean, in an effort to keep profits high, quote, or raise profits in the time of COVID, we have Delta, I believe, doing something that other airlines like United and Southwest, big airlines out there, are a lot of big airlines around the world. Speaking in the U.S., we hear a lot of stuff quickly about U.S. based airlines, right? And Delta is, I believe, continuing their policy of not filling the middle seat at an extra, increased cost for the two, window and aisle seats, whereas their counterparts, Southwest and United, are filling their aircraft to capacity, back kind of more normal. I believe that the United and Southwest cite, articles and studies and medical results saying that there's less of a chance to catch COVID in the plane with the air filtration and just the design and whatever than on the ground.
well, I know majority of the United planes and 737s as well, are just the older 737s and A320s that are out there, especially the new Neos, the 320s, the 321s, the 330s, the 340s, the 380s if you're on the double decker, on the Airbus side, or on the Boeing side if you're in a 737 original Max, 47 Intercontinentals, as well as the 777s and the 787 Dreamliners, all have been upgraded to hospital grade HEPA filters and
Yeah.
HEPA filtration systems in light of the COVID. Um,
Even with that, though, I mean, I kind of like Delta's model here, where, yeah, I think would I be still comfortable flying on a quote unquote, with a mask, of course, fully, fully stocked, as it were, plane? I mean, I'd still feel quote unquote safe flying. I haven't flown since I think March when this all kind of started. And that said,
That's
I
right.
still kind of
You were in the mix of everything. You were on a cruise
yeah,
and
we
flying
we
back
we
when
can
the
go into that a
lockdown
little
happened.
bit. And interesting my experience as poop hit the fan, or the proverbial saying. I yeah, like we can go into that in a couple weeks here, but I'd still be comfortable flying on a full plane with a mask. However, I think Delta's onto something here with the peace of mind of not filling that seat for a little, as much social distancing
And
within the aircraft as possible. I think that is the correct move. At least I think, even through the entirety of 2021, when there's, until there's national vaccination programs and all these, continued efforts to protect, the world from the virus. So
and and I'll be 100% honest. Um, I am willing to pay a little bit extra for elbow room. So I'm willing to
I
pay.
mean, yeah, is airline etiquette. I think I remember hearing from someone like a, I think I was actually coming back from China, I think, and the guy who was in business next to me was saying that back before he flew business all over the world, he told me that it's supposed to be airplane etiquette is, the middle seat gets both armrests because the aisle seat has the extra leg room and the window seat has the window plus something to lean on to sleep. So I never quite see that happen though, ever, I think.
Oh, I don't
And
think I've ever seen that happen. And on the
I like
right,
the idea. I try to do it at least when I'm flying. I usually sit in the same row with family or whatever. But
sure.
I mean, I've
And
never actually seen that.
I think every time that I've flown, let's see, and the funniest thing is, I flew the most at the beginning of this year than I have ever
Mhm.
flown before. Typically, in my yearly travels, I fly maybe 3 to 4 round trips. Um, I've flown in the past 12 months, including COVID time where I haven't flown at all. I've flown 6 round trips. It's the most
Total.
I've ever flown in a year, and that's during a pandemic, and it was all within 2 months. Two well,
Quite busy.
2.5 months. It was a significantly busy travel year for me, and I can say, even the fact that half of those flights I was flying business. So that's a different story because usually, at least on the airframes that I was on, that's either a dual seat where it's one aisle, one window, and there
Mhm.
is no middle seat. But on the one, when I flew out to Pennsylvania at the beginning of this year, and that was on just a standard 737 800,
Mhm.
that was I was lucky enough not to have someone sit in the middle seat between me and someone else. However, I, it always
A little
reminds
close.
me, yeah, it's always close, and I like having that elbow room. And part of
That's
me
why I
in the
think
back of my
Delta's
head,
onto something here. I mean, I
well,
think
yeah,
that, like you said, I would pay extra. I mean, I guess it wouldn't even be extra. It would just be the new, more expensive costs of the seats. I guess on a Delta flight.
well, and
But
that brings
I
into question.
I think I gladly pay. I think they're onto something.
I definitely do, and that brings in the question of, do you bring in more money, charge a little bit more, but do you reconfigure some of these planes to run, the more narrow body
Yeah.
standard airliners? Do you reconfigure them where you just have a window seat, a middle seat, and then another window seat where that middle
Yeah,
seat
I
is
would say like
basically
like the
high
2-1. Or could you imagine? I'm not recommending that airlines do this, but could you imagine if they reconfigured for that kind of layout and how much they could potentially upcharge for that single window seat? I mean, phew,
Well,
I'm sure people would
either
pay
that
it.
or do kind of a, without the cubicle setup of the 787 or the A330s and 40s, but do kind of a window aisle and then a single row of seats in the middle, and then
Hmm.
another. aisle window and set something up like that where you've got two aisles
Hmm.
instead of one on a narrower frame body, then everybody kind of gets what they want, and sure, you have less seats, but there's also, does it start leaning into something like that, or do you build planes out where you don't have
I'm
that
sure we'll
middle
see
seat
stuff like
anymore?
that. I'm sure that I'm sure we'll at least with smaller size aircraft to start minimum. I'm sure we'll. I mean, because consumer tastes are human behavior itself is shifting. So I wonder which of the air Boeing or not
Yeah.
will I think should or will capitalize on this kind of stuff. So
Well, and I think it's more along the lines of not necessarily which airplane manufacturer will do it, because an airplane
well, it also
manufacturer, if
comes
you
down to
pay
the
enough
airlines
money,
ordering
yeah,
what they want, like the layouts they want. Correct. I mean,
yeah, it's like going in and on a much smaller or on a much larger scale, but it's like going in and buying a car, but buying it factory direct through the dealership.
mhm.
You get to pick the options and the way you want things laid out. Essentially,
It's a two-way street. I mean, it's what airlines are based on. What the manufacturers are. Well, just like a car company, you go in and you can customize, but at the same time, they also have pre-done at least layouts, quote unquote,
yeah. So
and they can come up with a new airframe with a totally different kind of you know. I think we've been, but then again, we've also been hearing stuff like this for years with no middle seats or like double decker coach layout. Like you
uh,
see this, I think, all the time with different thoughts of even when it comes like even safety stuff, like a detachable cabin with parachutes. Like you see all this kind of stuff on the internet, and it could change. I hope it does. It could not. I mean, who really knows? I mean, to
we
be
just need
honest.
a commercial airliner racing series to start developing new technologies. The F,
And let that filter into the what the consumer space.
right. So,
Oh man, well, I want to some before we talk about what lovingly happened in F1 this whole week.
well, yeah, and we'll just touch on it briefly because I know we're already above
Yeah.
our time here, but
Interesting article. Last week we talked about Hamilton versus Hamilton. If you guys remember, with Hamilton, the F1 champion, and the Hamilton Watch Company. This week, there's an interesting article from Drive Tribe that is Mercedes versus Hamilton. It just seems that it's a lot of Hamilton versus everybody. But there was the point brought up that does Mercedes need Hamilton or does Hamilton need Mercedes? And I kind of agree with the article in that Mercedes has built this environment of technical prowess and they have a lot of bargaining power within F1, obviously. But then again, so does Hamilton for a lot of reasons as well. Mercedes has built an environment where Hamilton can grow and thrive. But Hamilton is also Hamilton, one of the best F1 drivers in history, obviously. And I believe at the end of the article I remember reading, and I agree with this, I don't think it's so much so that Mercedes doesn't need Hamilton or Hamilton doesn't need Mercedes kind of thing. I think they frankly need both. A lot of maybe even Mercedes bargaining power is due to Hamilton. So I don't think it's a question of if one doesn't need the other or if one needs the other. I think collectively they have the bargaining power that one would think quote unquote Mercedes has. Does that make sense?
that makes sense to me. But we've talked about it. I mean,
What are your thoughts, Nick, on I guess on the concept,
I
briefly?
think, yeah, briefly, I think you're right. I think you can't think of modern Mercedes F1 racing without thinking of Hamilton. And in the same respect, you can't really think of Hamilton without thinking of him as Mercedes' number one driver. And, he would not have been able to achieve the 7 world title championships that he's been, and quite honestly, he's earned them.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you can't get that without the Mercedes. I don't think. I think he would still be doing quite well, and this is something that we can, we'll definitely be talking about and pump the brakes here in just a second. But
Yeah, I think even with Hamilton, even if Hamilton wasn't there, I still think Mercedes would be doing well.
I
I
think
would
Mercedes would
maybe
be
they
doing
wouldn't be,
well.
maybe they wouldn't be I think even going into 20, like Red Bull is great at they're doing well at closing the gap right now to Mercedes, but I still don't think Mercedes is the number one favorite for 2021. Frankly, again, so
Yeah.
I think Mercedes would be doing about as well as they would be. Maybe they just wouldn't be the automatic favorite, which would be interesting, as we
Well,
saw.
and then you get to flip the coin too. If you put Hamilton in the Ferrari SP1000 from this
Hmm.
year, would you be able to do it? Would he be able to outdrive, you know, Leclerc and Vettel?
Well, maybe along those same lines, it depends on what you're actually driving. Like, a Williams compared to a Mercedes are two very different machines. There's the argument of a great driver can drive an ungreat car and still be great. I think that's true to a certain extent, because I don't really think you can compare the technical ability of Mercedes to Williams,
Right.
unfortunately, obviously.
That gap is,
And
I think, too big because that's going to
yeah,
lead us
that's what I'm
into.
basically that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
Yeah,
is
that's
that
leading us into
argument
the
is valid
Ferraris.
until the gap is too big. It's valid for a certain length of a gap, for a certain size of gap.
Yeah. So
But maybe
that
we
being said,
transition
yeah.
into
What
F1 and what happened over this week.
what the heck happened in F1 this week?
Well, even though we
Because
kind of already have, let's pump the brakes and
yeah,
yeah, as I typed out here, what the heck happened?
because there
Well,
was a
maybe
lot since
maybe we
last
start with
Sunday.
we hope that Hamilton, that Lewis Hamilton recovers very quickly and up to normal, if not better strength. He was confirmed diagnosed with COVID-19 this week. I don't know the current status of his test, but I believe he's getting better. I think he still might be positive, but he is getting better. I think so. Toto has said. We'll see what happens. If he'll race in Abu Dhabi or not, barring negative tests and him being back up to snuff. We hope he gets better. As soon as possible.
And I
We miss
know
him. We
is
miss him.
yes, I echo those statements. I do hope he gets better. Obviously, is awful. I don't want
But him
anybody
being
to go through it.
gone, we
Him being
saw
gone led to
George
the
Russell
well,
take the seat in his car, and it is I think Toto's right. It is Hamilton's car over Van Dorn, which was interesting to see George Russell, while clearly,
well, hold
as
on.
we saw today.
So
Hang on,
I want to step through this.
I know you want to go to what why maybe?
No. Because initially the seat opened up and
Yeah.
everybody, and I know we talk about this on the podcast a lot, but I giggle at it. It's a great way to perk up my day.
What?
On Formula Dank, uh, the Dank meme subreddit of Formula One. Um,
Oh God.
Immediately, as soon as everybody saw that Hamilton
Hulkenberg.
had a positive COVID test, it was just completely flooded with George Russell, Nico Rosberg, and Fernando Alonso memes. Just
Yeah.
explosion.
Hulkenberg. Yeah.
And some of those were absolutely fantastic, and almost none of them included Van Dorn
Yeah, on a more serious note, we saw how
because,
talented today Russell is, and
yes.
him being a Mercedes Junior driver, right? I believe it, and he's in
Well,
their
and
junior program,
in their junior
and
program, and not to mention after during testing last year at the end of the season in Bahrain, he placed the highest
mhm.
timing above Lewis Hamilton in the W11.
So maybe not surprising why he's in the seat, but maybe a little bit of surprise why he's in the seat over the Mercedes relief driver. But Van Dorn was a little busy doing something else
Yes, he was testing.
recently. So
Yeah, he was testing Mercedes EQ team Formula E car at the time that he got the call. Now, he still came to Bahrain. He still sat in the hospitality booth in case
he still
something
released a
happened.
statement saying that it was painful he wasn't chosen. But I mean, it kind of makes sense why he maybe wasn't. I mean, he may be making a shift elsewhere potentially, and given the prowess and the ability and the track record so far of the Mercedes Junior driver in Russell, I wasn't sad, and frankly, like you said, Nick, turning on the even FP. I started the weekend with FP2, and I found myself rooting flat out for Mercedes. Period, for the first time. Just
For the first time for me as an F1 fan, I've always been kind of bouncing between um, Ferrari in years past, not this year, and and just generally Ferrari has kind of fallen out of favor. We've discussed that in the past,
Yeah,
but
I've always same way. I've always jumped back between primarily Red Bull, but
yeah,
a little bit of
Red Bull and
McLaren as
Ferrari,
well in
yeah,
years past.
and
So
McLaren, and you know, it was always interesting to see where the other teams fell. I kind of had the the hometown, not hometown, but home country allegiance with Haas as well. Kind of,
yep, first time an American-born driver, I believe, in what was it? Fittipaldi, right?
I believe so, right?
Yeah, he believe I'm not sure what his nationality is now, but he's born in Miami. It's the first time that an American-born driver raced for the American quote unquote F1 team. So kind of cool.
Quote unquote F1 team.
Quote unquote F1 team.
uh, well,
That argument I think can be made, but nonetheless, I mean, so
sure.
it makes sense. That was I think a big thing in the beginning of the week with why, but I think as George Russell clearly demonstrated, he dropped down a boot size, might not have fit in the car, left him battered and bruised through
Yeah.
his FP sessions.
By the way, that man is a monster. He is a giraffe of a man compared to Lewis.
Compared to Lewis Hamilton,
If you
he
look at
had
them side by side, holy
I don't
cow!
know if any of you have ever actually worn, for an extended period of time, as I have, worn a boot size, like a shoe size, well, shall we say, smaller than you actually need. And that's painful just normal day to day. I can't imagine what that was like for his feet wearing going from an 11 to a 10 in an F1 car for practice sessions, qualifying, and a race. I mean,
Yeah,
ugh,
and
he
on top,
was
I mean,
clearly
and
not
just
meant to fit in
smashed
that car.
into that car. He
I mean, it
handled it
left him
well,
battered and bruised,
but
and
yeah,
well, of course. I mean, we saw with what he held the fastest time in FP, I believe 2 and 3,
1 and 3, I
or one
believe.
and two. Who had it in two then?
I can't. I want to say it was one of the Red Bulls, but
Bottas? No, Verstappen.
yeah, Verstappen had,
Verstappen might have had two. He at least two of the free practices he had top, spot.
and he
He
only
qualified
came behind Valtteri in
like
qualifying by a
point
very,
0.02 or something
yeah.
like that.
I believe either 2/10 or 200ths of a second
I think along those lines, he did was exceptional. Already, I think meeting if not exceeding expectations
for
up
still having
until
to ask
lights out.
where buttons were on the steering wheel during the race. I think he
telling
did
him to
fine.
telling the pit wall crew to remind him to pit in the first bay because he's not used to
Yes.
going there. Oh god, he's hilarious, and I think he's clearly great. And what I mean, up until race day, well, let's keep on track here. Obviously, right? For the first time, his F1 debut, Jack Aiken replaced Russell's Williams seat, and then obviously a very famous name in motorsport, Fittipaldi replaced Romain Grosjean, who, as we said before, did not race today and will not be racing next weekend, unfortunately. And yeah, and also we didn't talk about this. Bottas, he got pole. I mean, well, I think it's his 16th or something like that career pole. I mean, well
And
done to him. It's
absolutely
nice to
well
see
done to
Bottas
him.
shine a little bit because the Hamilton shadow looms a little large, I think, over Bottas often. So
And it should be mentioned, both Valtteri and George are either current or former Williams drivers. So Williams had a good showing on pole this week.
they did, and they locked out first and second spots with Verstappen, and I believe was Alex in Finite qualified
Correct.
P4, and then the two racing points were 5 and 6.
I
Let
believe
me
it was
see.
something along those lines, but
Nonetheless, I mean, we had a great lineup, and I was very much looking forward to. I mean, as much as I wanted, you know, obviously Russell to win, first points, first pole, lead his first laps in an F1 race. This was I think Verstappen's chance. Mercedes maybe a little bit of their game to not to mention during the race, but to start the race, Hamilton's gone. I mean, he's constantly pushing and fighting with Bottas. I mean, and then
so
we
let's jump into this race
lights
because
out,
well, no,
and then
hang on.
well,
Because
what's left?
did you did you watch the formation lap
Oh yeah, we're
where
we're
Verstappen just decided that he was going to be second place for a little while?
and then
Uh,
then after like turn 4 or whatever, let Russell go by.
yeah, let him go.
Uh,
Yeah,
haven't
which
seen that in a while. I thought that was funny. Didn't really maybe bode well because he had a big spot of bad luck.
yes,
After the formation lap, they lined back up, lights out, and he got pinched real quick by both Merc drivers. Had to drop back, and then we saw with I think through turn 4,
it
he
was the
just
turn. Was it the turn into turn 4 or was it the
I think it was
turn?
turn 4. I
Yeah,
think I think it was either 3 into 4 or turn 4, one of the two. And it looked like he braked really early because I think he was being a little more cautious. It looked like than he
well, and
usually
he
drives.
knew. I mean, because Sergio got out in front of him a little bit,
Hmm.
and Sergio got
And
sideways
Sergio had the inside, and then what was it? Leclerc tried to just just shoot past him.
in typical
He
Leclerc
hit
fashion.
Yeah, don't. I'm not going to make any comment on that because he did, take I guess blame for back when Max and
He did.
him were watching the race, frankly, from the hospitality areas, I think, and he zoomed by, hit I believe Sergio's leftmost rear wheel and or something I think, and basically destroyed his left. Was it his
I think watching the
left
replays,
front?
it looked like the front wing of
And his left front of the Ferrari
yeah,
was just trash, and he couldn't steer it. So
yeah.
he went careening off into the gravel, and Max went wide and tried to go around Leclerc, but he
In
frankly just couldn't avoid it. It looks like he ran out of room, and when time he was already over the gravel, you have no control basically over that, and he smashed into the wall. He just was
into Max's defense, I mean,
man.
that gravel was the same color as the asphalt there. I don't know if they
Hmm.
painted the gravel to match, but even Max said he didn't realize the gravel was coming up that fast, and as soon as his front wheel just lost traction,
Yep.
there's nothing else that you can do at
And
that
he
point.
smashed into the wall, and it wasn't his fault. It was so like this race was just a roller coaster of emotions more than any other. I think I walked away from this being
Well,
I was ecstatic,
because
I
in that
was
first
angry,
turn, we had
I was
we had George Russell take first place in Lewis's car.
yeah, and he led for he
He
did
led
everything
for
he was supposed to do this
almost
today.
the first 30 laps of that race. It was him in
He
front.
did everything he was supposed to do. Even when the going got he made positions back up, and he got Bottas is already unlucky enough this season, unfortunately it seems like, and he got Mercedes just had a lot of bad luck today, and Max was out, which I was so upset with because I just wanted to see what would have happened. Frankly, even if Leclerc had stayed in as well, but that happened. Yellow. I think we had a safety car
We
actually
had
come
we
out.
had safety
Obviously.
car come out. George was still up front, got a great getaway from behind the safety
Hmm.
car, led for 30ish more laps, and then did again everything he was supposed to do. Came
He did
out on
everything he
top.
was supposed to do.
You know,
And then we had, and then I think one of the Williams,
yeah,
I
it
believe
was Jack Aiken
it
in
was Aiken.
George Russell's car.
Yeah, basically had a little, I had a little donut moment and smashed off his front wing, which brought out I believe, a virtual safety car, and there wasn't a wide enough gap for a marshal to, I guess, go and pick up,
Correct.
the wing. And mind you, there's other small debris, which will come up a little bit in a second here. And so safety car, actual car came out again, right? And then Mercedes took, I think, the right choice to get some new tires on, to stack a safety car pit. They had Ferrari, by the way, a little bit of pause. Had I think they had like what 4.5 second pit stop. They had again so many issues with their
Horrible pit
pit.
stops with
Like
Seb's car.
it to the point now where like I feel like I'm almost sorry for them. I mean, they just gotta get it together on pits. I mean, geez. But
Well,
Mercedes, who's
and
usually not
Crofty
that
even
bad,
said he's like, they're not firing on all cylinders today. And for
when
those who,
have they been though? I mean, frankly.
well, and that's exactly where I was going with this is for those who listen regularly or have gone back and re-listened to our podcast, first of all, thank you. Second of all, you know that I watch the F1 races on Sunday mornings with my grandpa. And my grandpa looked over at me and he goes, when have they ever been good at pit stops? And I'm like, yeah, all right, that's fair.
Not this year, at least. And Mercedes, who usually is, though, what happened? Oh my lord! I mean, when they
So
did
so
that stack,
let's break this down. So virtual
yellow
safety car
car,
is
yellow
out.
safety, can't clear the track.
Can't clear the
Actual
track.
safety car, everybody stacks up. Mercedes takes the choice to double pit and essentially stack Bottas behind Russell first.
So
You want to
pit, yeah,
go? Like,
pit,
we'll trade off here.
pit crews come out. George Russell gets new tires. He was on the hards. They switch him to the mediums.
Needs.
He leaves the pits.
He storms off. Bottas pulls up. I'll take the Bottas part. Bottas, unfortunately, again, just bad luck. Relatively decent pit for Russell. Bottas pulls up. They're changing his tires, and I think the front stare looking like if you were sitting in the driver's seat, the front left and guy who changes I don't know what the word is, like changes the tire. You know what I mean? He signals that something's wrong. And what it seemed to be, it wasn't confirmed yet, that they had screwed up the tires. And later on, Toto confirmed that there weren't the proper calls made to the garage and things were confused. And it almost looked like they did the essentially 2 full tire changes for Bottas. And because they couldn't figure out whose tires they were supposed to use, remember, teams have a specific set of tires. Obviously, it's a number of each kind, but each driver has their own. You can't have, you know, Verstappen using Alex's tires and vice versa.
Right,
That's
they're actually
against
marked
the
with their
regulations.
initials on
Yeah, so
the
I think what
outside
it
of the
looked like
tire.
is they had the wrong tires, and because they couldn't figure out what's going on, they put the same hards back on Bottas's car, and that wasn't clear if those were the same tires he came in with, later confirmed to be so, and then he sped off. All the while, the Mercs dropped from positions 1 and 2 down to, I think, like, what was it, like in the maybe even like
It was
5th,
it
9th,
was
or
one
even
and
the
two to
what was it?
fifth and seventh, I believe.
Okay, not quite as well as I thought, but
But
I just
then
totally botched, completely
completely
botched.
botched it. Now,
So then they come back out, then they rejoin the formation like around 5th and 6th or 7th,
yes,
whatever.
and then I'll take this part. Racing resumes, and they realize, hey, George, we put the wrong tires on your car. You need to come back in. So George comes back in and gets another set of tires put on his car.
Rightfully so, his tires.
Yes,
Because they believed that he had Bottas's tires on,
correct.
which is, even though that's wrong, I think is something like I think
You
I
have
didn't know
four
this until
laps.
today. You have,
Yeah,
was it
you
like
have
3 or 4 laps to change it before you get penalized?
correct.
And they did 1 lap around, and then he came back in. So then, what
So
essentially?
he was dropped down pretty significantly from that point as well. Now, racing resumed yet again. Everybody was making up their times. Things were going well. And
And
then
at which point I think Bottas was around P9 or P8 or so, and Russell, because he was on the frankly not worn and not hard medium tires, fresh medium tires, worked his way all the way back up to P2, which was again doing everything he was supposed to do throughout the entire day, and just a great performance. And then, presumably because of some of the debris from the earlier Aitken Williams crash, he had I believe, a left rear puncture, which I haven't seen a puncture in a long time.
I think the
So
last one was at Monza.
he had to come back in again after he had gained all of that ground to have
And
obviously
being that it was a safety
another
car, the track was
change.
bunched. And he.
And by the time he got out, I think he got out of the field in, I think, something like P13 or something wrong like
It
that, and
was
obviously out of the
P15.
points.
And
Okay,
he
so he's
had to
out
make
of the
up.
points, obviously,
Yeah.
and visibly even on the radio, they let it play through. Just not happy, needless to say. And I felt so bad for him because he was out of, not only
Yeah.
was he out of a podium finish, but he was potentially out of the contender for fastest lap, which he had currently, owned for the race, and out of the points. His first ever even just points in an F1 race. But
Yeah.
the only silver lining I think could be he did everything right. And that said, he fought his way back up to P9 in points range. He got his ever points in Formula One, which congratulations to him. He did everything right. He was fantastic. Sucks for Bottas as well. Not
I
a great
believe he
showing for
earned
the
driver
Mercs.
of the day as well,
Yes, he
which
did,
he
and
very rightly
fastest
should
lap.
have. Yes, he very
So,
rightly should have.
and I think that to cap his performance, I think Toto said something like, "This is just the end to a bad, a bad ending to a fairy tale that's on like just beginning." A new star is born here, is what he said, I believe, and I think he showed what we all expected him to. It sucks that he didn't get any podium finish,
Well, and throughout this
but
entire week, as I've said before, the announcer said today, many articles have already said by the time this podcast will be released, George Russell did everything that he needed to go to Mercedes and ask for the next open seat.
I'm not going to say the next. Based on what Toto's saying, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I would say he did everything he was supposed to do to show that he's ready for something more. Not necessarily ask for the seat or fight, I think Hamilton or Bottas for it, but he is clearly ready for something more than what he's currently doing. And
Yeah,
maybe that takes the form of the seat or not, but like Toto said, a star has been born here, and it's not the end. He's 22, he's young, and I think he showed his stuff. So nonetheless, congratulations to
yeah.
him for an amazing performance. He might not have finished on the podium, but he did finish in the points. He did finish with driver of the day, fastest lap, and I think his future is clearly very bright.
I believe so as well. Now,
Mm,
pumping the brakes yet again, let's rewind to that first incident between the three cars that took out Max and Leclerc. And
Because
let's,
Sergio Perez was involved in that
yes, in which case, in which he had to come in, he had to make a pit stop, he got some new tires,
and sent to
and,
the back of the field.
and sent to the back of the field, correct. And then over the remaining 86 laps, yes, 86 laps, it was a
Very short track, I think under 2 miles. Most laps since like 19 something on a track or
yeah,
something
it's
like
been a while
19.
since they've had anything over 80 laps, and
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 that
again,
and
it
that
was
man
a
just fought his way the entire time.
yes,
He
and
fought his way back.
for those of you who have not seen it, he
You need to go
won.
watch it.
Yes, he won today. So he took
And
P1, top step of the podium, center
for the
step
first time,
for the first
the first
time.
time I believe a Mexican F1 driver has taken podium one since I can't remember the driver, but
1971.
it was amazing. And all of the drivers that finished today with Perez being number one, they finished by merit. Like they deserved to finish where they were. That's why I think like this race for me was, I was happy, I was angry, I was sad, I was frustrated,
There were too
just
many emotions to
I was
feel
grabbing
anything
my
today.
hair
Yeah,
at times. I mean, it was such a great race in a lot of ways, and even bad ones made it great. Some of the bad instances made it great. Things like Russell not getting what he did, but because of what he showed. And congratulations to, man, to all of them. I mean, maybe not
so
the ending that we wanted initially, but it was still a great race.
so to round off the podium today, we had Sergio Perez taking the center step. We had Esteban Ocon, who had his very first ever podium today after a
From
year
Renault,
from Renault.
for those who might not know.
Yeah, Renault driver who has not had a great year this year.
Yeah,
By
arguably
self-admission,
for that team, yeah, that team alone it's always seemed to favor or the outcomes for Renault Ricardo this year, let alone him. So, God, what a
so
way
for
to
him to
finish
take
his day.
P2, fantastic. I was extremely excited to see him.
And
Lance,
for maybe even
yeah,
the first time, I think, to Racing Point rounded out. the final place.
Right.
Both Racing Point, previously Force India,
Again,
drivers
yeah, and
took
again, I
1 and 3.
so a lot of people were pointing out, well, it's just the pink Mercedes. In a lot of ways, yes, it was the pink Mercedes. But both of, as you said, as people have said over and over again, this race was won on merit. I believe that Sergio Perez, whether or not he
And Stroll.
and Stroll,
And Lance Stroll. I mean, they both, all three drivers. I think won on merit. No matter what happened
well,
today,
absolutely,
Perez even
that
more
that
so. But
podium was an entirely merit-based podium, and I completely, completely agree with that. And I, I mean, Sergio would have had that podium last week if there wasn't an engine issue, and he would have had, he still would have been on the
heartbreak last
podium
week.
today,
Yeah.
provided that the Mercedes issues
Well,
hadn't
I mean,
happened.
interestingly enough, though, yeah, like you said, he would have had podium last week. So heartbreak with his engine failure, last week.
Which is,
But there's also something interesting, I think, from this race that Stroll, had he not locked up, I think coming out of like one of the final laps on turn 1 or 2, which allowed Perez to go by, he may have had, first position P1 at the end of the race today. It could have been, maybe
yeah,
we don't.
he seemed a
Obviously,
little upset about it. Like he didn't really seem too excited for
yeah,
Sergio
I
after
noticed
the
that
race.
too. I think, while I would say that's kind of unacceptable in a way, it's also a little understandable given that I agree, he might have, I think he did, frankly, cost himself number one spot when
I'm
he
just
locked up.
hoping that it wasn't
Yeah,
because of other factors. And the question that's always in the back of my mind, it's same as when I was in high school and the teacher's son was in my class and somehow he was able to do no wrong. I always kind of have that in the back of my head that Lawrence and Lance, are related. So the owner of the team is related to their it's supposed to
driver.
be their number one driver, but they're shared equally. And Sergio, again, on merit, and I am so disappointed that he does not have a drive for next year
But
at the
that's an
moment.
interesting thing. This might very well prove that he does deserve
Oh,
a
he has the
spot
merit.
in Formula
He
20,
absolutely
21,
does.
21.
He definitely deserves a seat at what he deserves to be an F1, and he proved that on merit today. Um, and the fact that they're kind of you know
Yep.
shunting him away and
Yep.
deciding not to renew his contract. This is a little bit of vindication for him. So I'm extremely happy to
hmm
see that. And again,
And we'll have
same.
to see what the talks are like, especially after his performance today, and we'll see even what happens next week.
Well, in the same way with Esteban. I mean, for
Yep.
him, I mean, just after such a tough season, to see him on top, that again, vindication that he deserves to be there on
hmm
merit and with a you know with a solid team.
Yep.
So
Well, I think it's interesting. I think that maybe if Russell over the coming week, we'll see if we're talking about Russell in Hamilton spot or not. See if Hamilton hopefully he does recover very quickly from coronavirus, and if he's back, great. But I would also say that he has his obviously championship tied up nonetheless, and I I would love to see George Russell have another shot next weekend. I really would.
I would too, and I also before we close this out, I just want to get your take. Um,
Uh
what do you
oh.
think is going on in Alex Albon's head today? Because quite honestly, I've seen a lot of people saying that Sergio Perez should have his spot.
I've been thinking about that lately. Um, I what's going on in I can't say what's going on in his head. Here's what's going on in mine. When Alex got the seat, I I fully agreed with him deserving it, and he started off relatively strong. He's great at overtaking, and that's just what he does. And there is a little bit of the Red Bull. I think a lot of like the Red Bull just churns through their second drivers there because Max is so good that it's hard to be compared to him all the time and to achieve the same levels he does. And while that might be part of it, I am now of the camp that unfortunately I think Alex is a very good driver. I just don't think he's gonna get the seat next year. I don't. I think it obviously, as Christian has said, it's his seat to lose. I think, frankly, the fact that we haven't heard anything even yet going now is the 17th race of the 17 race season next weekend. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't get it. I don't think he's shown that he should. And I think it'd be kind of cool and definitely vindication for Perez to get that seat. I think I would welcome that.
And
That's
I'm
my take on
I
it right
I'm in
now.
agreement with you because
I hate
I
to say it, but
I do hate to say it because I really don't. I'm of the the mindset that unless you are grossly negligent in your job, I don't like to see people lose their positions, whether that's a race
agreed.
car driver or a secretary in a business setting. I really
But when it
don't
comes
like.
to F1, you have to show that
You
whether or
you have to put
whether
in
you're
the
being compared to Hamilton or Stappen or not, you still have to show that you deserve it. And the fact that I think it speaks volumes that Alex still doesn't have a confirmed seat, and even speaks more volumes that someone like Sergio, who has just shown I think that he does deserve one, also doesn't have one. I think it would be a good fit for him to slide right in there to that Red Bull second seat.
and
And I
I
don't know
think
where Alex would
Sergio
go
is ready to
frankly,
move
but
up in the world, and while I think Alex has a lot of. I mean, he did well for at the time it was Toro Rosso, or
mhm.
was it Toro Rosso, or
No,
did
it
he?
was F2.
Well, he came in an F2, but then he also didn't. Was he not racing for? No, you're right. They did bring him up from F2
Yeah, he
for.
didn't race for Toro Rosso, I don't think.
Well, no, he came in for AlphaTauri because he swapped places with Pierre Gasly.
Oh, that's right. Yep, yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep. Yeah, they
So
swapped when
so
well,
he
yeah,
but
when
he came in as and he did well, obviously, for the AlphaTauri team, which
yep.
I don't think he came in as a Toro Rosso. I think he came in after the branding switch. So last season, start of the season, and then he was brought up to Red Bull. And you know what? I also am kind of in the camp that Pierre Gasly has shown his merit as well this year, but I also
Well, that's
haven't seen.
interesting. Would they give him another shot?
I don't think so. And the reason behind it is I think Pierre has earned his seat at AlphaTauri. I don't
Hmm.
think he's earned the second seat at Red Bull.
I would agree, at least not yet. And I'm not saying that I would love to see back at Red. I don't think he deserved much like I was not. I was sad to see Gasly go, but it made sense, and I agree with it in the same sense here. If Alex does end up
Yeah.
going, if he stays, I'll be happy. If he ends up going, and who knows to where, frankly, I'll be sad to see him go, but I will agree with it. So, but
I
we'll have to
think
see. We have one race left. I think we enjoy the last race of the season for whatever it gives us, and then we'll see
and
what
we'll see
happens.
if George Russell gets dragged out of the Mercedes garage, clawing his way back if Lewis is okay this week. Because
Yeah,
it's kind of you know, the whole idea of well, I want to be fast again, and what are all these? So someone threw up a picture of the scene from Talladega Nights where he's like, "What are all those other things that are going by me?" He's like, "Those are the other cars." you know, it's unfortunate that Williams has not had a great vehicle,
yep.
um, and I think George definitely will learn a lot. Although he kind of showed that he already knew what he was doing. The very basics of him handling the car were shown 100% today, and he did
Yep.
extremely well.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Yep. I agree.
yeah, this has been a crazy, crazy roller coaster day, a crazy roller coaster week in the world of F1. And quite honestly, I will be glad to see what happens next week so that we
Yep.
can
Me too.
finally start planning for the 2021 season.
Yep. I think with that, if you have nothing else, Nick, I don't either. I think that's a checker flag on this week. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. Make sure that you check out all of our social medias at Redline Resorts on all platforms. And if you guys once again have anything you want us to talk about, or you want to engage or ask any questions, think we missed something or are wrong about something, please reach out to us at podcast@redlineresorts.com. With that, I'm Matt. That's Nick, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, guys.